Let me tell you, first of all, that I'm hopefully toward the end of laryngitis. When I talked with Mary on the phone last week, it was just barely a whisper. And so I may go from baritone to falsetto and then back up to baritone, but we'll get through it. As Mary said, I've been writing for South Carolina Wildlife Magazine since 1989. And I've had some wonderful experiences, had opportunities to go to places that maybe other folks won't ever get to go. This is my wife, Jane. She's not only my IT expert and is responsible for actually having the thing up on the screen. She's retired from teaching kindergarten for 34 years. And about, I guess, 6 or 8 years ago now, having been a writer for a long time, I kept running across references to something called the Cherokee Path. And the references were pretty compelling. Apparently this Cherokee Path ran all the way from modern-day downtown Charleston to Fort Loudon in Tennessee, way up into Tennessee, near Maryville and Knoxville in that area. And the accounts that I kept running across were of troops of 1,500 soldiers and the royal governor, Governor James Glenn, trooping up and down this Cherokee Path in the 1700s. And I thought, how could this be possible? Because being a lifelong South Carolinian, I know what's between the mountains of South Carolina, where we live, and Charleston. A lot of different kinds of territories, swamps and huge rivers and all this. How could this possibly be? So I talked to the editor of the magazine, and I said, David Lucas is the editor at the time. I said, David, I don't know where this story's headed, but it appears to be a good story. I said, Jane is about to retire. We're going to, at our own expense, we're going to go down on the coast and work our way back up and see what we can find of this old Cherokee Path. And where do you start that kind of research? I got on the internet, and I just Googled Cherokee Path. Well, it turns out there's this fellow, Roy Vandergriff III. And when you get to know him, you understand the third is really important. Who had done a fair amount of work. He had identified several sections of this old road from the 1700s that were still out there, which just amazed me. The same road that Governor James Glenn in 1765 took 1,500 troops and men and material and wagons, and they even carried cattle along with them as a food source. They'd stop, every 30, 40 miles and kill a cow and sit down and have lunch, pack up and move on a little bit farther. And so he's saying, yeah, there's some sections out there. Well, I never could get in touch with the fellow. Never could figure out exactly where he lived, because I'd find references to him having spoken to a group here and there. Well, Jane and I were at the Saluda County Museum, a tiny little museum. Really, the whole museum's not much bigger than this room, but a wonderful lady in there. And I said, let me ask you something. I said, there's this mythical fellow, Roy Vandergriff III, and I've been trying to find out where he lives. Do you know anything about it? She said, oh yeah, he's at a funeral right across the street. I'll give him a call. So she whips out her cell phone. She said, the funeral hadn't started. She calls him, and she says, Roy, I got somebody here in the museum that wants to talk to you. And he said, well, I got to go to the funeral, but I'll be right down there. So he does. He comes, and we set up a date, and he and his wife took us through the entire length of Saluda County, which is where he lives, and showed us every section that he knew where it was. And so, from those humble beginnings over the 4 summers when Jane was off school, and knows how many trips we made, this slideshow that you're going to see is a result of that. Now, it's probably longer than we can do this morning, but we will start where it entered South Carolina on the Chattooga River, and we will work downstream toward Charleston as far as we can. And being a kindergarten teacher, I don't know if you all were ever aware of this or not, but there was a character, I think there's a book called Flat Stanley, and Flat Stanley was a little cutout figure, and they'd send him all over the world. People would go on vacations, and they'd take Flat Stanley and stand him up by the Washington Monument and take a picture of him and all this and send it back. Well, Jane plays the character Flat Stanley in the entire thing. You will see her all the way from the Chattooga River to downtown Charleston. But one thing I with Wildlife Magazine is If you want to make a picture interesting, put a person in it. You know, nature's great and wonderful, but you put a picture in it, all of a sudden people are interested. Who is that? What are they doing there? What? You know. So here we are. As a matter of fact, Jane and I just took this photo about 6 weeks ago because I had never photographed the point where the Cherokee Path actually crossed into South Carolina on Chattooga River, and it's not easy to find. But we had a whole morning devoted to it and Google Earth maps, and we found it. And this is it. This is Earl's Ford on the Chattooga River. If you're at all familiar with the Chattooga River in South Carolina, you know where Mountain Rest community is in northern Oconee County? It's kind of west of there. Pretty remote, actually. This place where she is standing is the actual old road bed. And I'll show you in just a minute how we know that to be true. That's it. That's where she was standing. Right straight across, let me go back to here, is a creek that comes in over there. So we knew we were in the right place because all the historical references said the Cherokee Path crossed the Chattooga River at War Woman Creek. War Woman was Nancy Hart, who was a legendary figure among the Cherokees and addressed the Treaty of Hopewell. I think there was like 900 Indians of various tribes, and General Andrew Pickens and everybody the treaty. Nancy Hart was the leader of the Cherokees at that time, and that creek is named for her. And War Woman Creek is just out of your view right there. So this is the real deal. We know we're in the right place, and that is, you could see where it continues on in North Carolina right there. Maybe not so good in the slide, but it's very clearly an open road over there. I don't know how far it goes before it starts, you know, getting destroyed by development or whatever. This is War Woman Creek that I was talking about right there. So this is where everybody forded for about 250 years. There were people moving up and down the Cherokee Path. This is where most of the battles took place, and this is how we know we're in exactly the right place. Where you saw Jane standing there at the side of the river, this is only about 100 yards back up the logging road that now goes there. This is the old roadbed. I stood down in the roadbed, and Jane is standing up in the road. You can see how deep it is. We have found this all the way across the state. Wherever there is a section of the Cherokee Path left. Now remember, this road dates back to, well, Mary has brought a map here, the original map that was done in 1730. So if you put thousands of men, horses with shoes on, cattle, iron-rimmed wagons on sloped terrain, it pulverizes the soil every time they go over it. It rains, washes out, the next creek comes through, and eventually we have found it as, that's about head high right there. You can see I'm standing in the bottom of it, and actually it's deeper than my head. So it's about almost 6 feet deep there. This is the Earl's Ford sign there where you have to park. It's not very far, maybe 1/10 of a mile down there. Right before you get to Earl's Ford, by the way, those of you, I handed out wildlife magazines. Does everybody have one? Does anybody not have one? I interviewed a fellow who worked at the U.S. Forest Service Stump House Mountain Ranger Station, not very far from Mountain Rest, who had grown up near Earl's Ford. And that's how I first found out that's where it crossed the Chattooga River. And he mentioned that he lived near Village Creek, Village Creek, and there was a Village Creek church right there. And he said, if you can find that little church, he said the Cherokee Path went right in front of it. Well, lo and behold, 6 weeks ago when we were up there looking for Earl's Ford, we found the church. Now, it's not much, but they're obviously see there, Village Creek Church. They are a very active, proactive congregation. There's Cherokee Path coming in right behind the church, right behind the restroom. Thought I had a slide of the outhouse in there, but they actually have 2 outhouses, one for men and one for women, and I didn't go in because men just don't do that. That's what the woods are for, right? Men's restroom is on the left side of the logging road, women's restroom is on the right side of the logging road. So anyway, Jane goes in and she said, it's really nice in there. She said, for an outhouse, they've got room deodorizer, they have real Charmin bathroom tissue. So, it's an up and coming church. Very proactive congregation we have here. After the Cherokee Path working its way toward Charleston left the Chattooga River and Village Creek Church, really the next landmark was a 1760s era frontier outpost. It eventually became a trading post, but it was one of those frontier forts. They were all over Spartanburg County. There was Fort Thickety and Fort Prince and Gowan Fort. These were, and the blockhouse near Tryon. These were frontier forts that were established by the colonial government as early as 1715. The reason that article is called The Key to Carolina is because probably more than any other colonial governor, Governor James Glenn, realized that, there's just a few of us and a lot of Indians, There were coastal tribes all up and down the coast. The Cherokees were the most powerful and most numerous among them, but there was a lot. They could have wiped the Europeans out just like that. And Governor James Glenn discovered two things. That first, the Cherokee Path, which already existed, but he started to improve very early on up to the kind of standards where you could get a wagon up as opposed to a man with deer skins on his back or maybe a horse. That improving the Cherokee Path was an important first step to establishing a relationship with these Indians, mostly the Cherokees, that were located in the backcountry or the interior. But he also described, and this is where the title of the article comes from, that the success or the failure of Carolina, meaning what is now North and South Carolina, was establishing a relationship with the Cherokees. It was do or die. If the colony did not establish a good working relationship with the Cherokees, it had no future. I've told people the French were coming in from Mississippi and had pretty much occupied, that's why they speak Cajun down in New Orleans. The French had pretty much occupied all of the Mississippi River Valley and were working over in this area and wooing the Cherokees. And I remember I told a reporter with the Greenville News one time, I was doing an article about Cherokee Path, and I said, if the Cherokees had allied with the French instead of the British, we'd all be having croissants for breakfast instead of grits. And we'd be wearing little black berets and have an attitude. So I'm glad it turned out the way it did, because I love grits. But anyway, the next thing you would encounter on the Cherokee Path coming in this direction is now called, and it may have been called that in colonial times, but one of these two buildings, and I'm not sure even the State Park Service is sure which one was the original outpost, the colonial fort, which one was a trading post. But that is right off of Cherokee Foothills Scenic Highway near Walhalla. It's now a little miniature state park. That's really the only thing that's there. Next thing you run up on is, I have a new clicker and I have a real problem remembering which one's forward and which one's backward. Okay. Hopewell Church near Pendleton. This is right at Clemson University, is the site where General Andrew Pickens, who was not only a Revolutionary War hero, but also had numerous successful, for the most part, battles with the Cherokees. The Cherokee Wars occurred in the 1760s as sort of a preface to the American Revolution. Andrew Pickens was involved in both, and this is his grave. General Pickens buried here, and his wife, who had been a Calhoun, as in John C. Calhoun. I think he was John C. Calhoun's niece. There at Pendleton. I can't get this right. This is where General Pickens, Andrew Pickens' retirement home was. And it's on a knoll, not very far from Oconee Station that I just showed you. I'm trying to think where I can fix. Have you ever been to Walhalla or know where Walhalla is? In this direction, and that'd be before you get to Walhalla, you start getting some really nice mountain views near Tomasi DAR School. And this is right near the Tomasi DAR School. And the reason I put it in the slideshows is Andrew Pickens chose this as his last home, the little house there. He had a huge plantation, Hopewell, down below Clemson. But when he got toward retirement years, he was too old to farm and all that. So he built this retirement home up near Tomasi Knob because he had fought what he described as his last and most desperate battle on Tomasi Creek, right in front of where this boulder. The DAR years ago put up a marker there where the house was. That's really all that's left. I think I have, yes, there's the marker and Tomasi Knob. Right down in front is Tomasi Creek, runs that little drainage right down through there. During the height of the Cherokee Wars, there was actually two phases of it. Andrew Pickens was leading a group of not very many militia, about 20, kind of on a scouting mission really to kind of gauge what effect they were having on the Cherokees overall. And they were coming up Tomasi Creek, just 20, and when you read in the historic literature militia, these are not trained soldiers. These are farmers and blacksmiths and folks who are willing, to fight for the cause, but they're not really trained military troops. General Pickens, on the other hand, by this time had achieved, a pretty fairly sophisticated. He got his generalship, honestly. He really was a military genius. Well, here he is out in the middle of nowhere with 20 militia troops. They get into this little drainage right down in here. It was a cane break, which means cane. I know there are a lot of botany people in here. This is a Rundinaria gigantea, the native river cane that grows. And when it grows, particularly historically, not so much these days, but it grows in these huge homogeneous stands, which were called cane breaks. Nothing but cane, isn't there? They were working their way through a cane break, which is, you can't see 20 feet in front of it. And all of a sudden, they start taking on fire from all directions. They're Indians in the cane and up in the woods and all around. And that's why he called it his last and most desperate fight. He said he actually didn't see any way to survive. It's called the ring fight. He put his men in a ring and told them just to shoot at will. Anything you think is the Cherokee, have at it. So they all get in a ring, and the fight's pretty hot. And I don't know where this idea came from, but he set the cane break on fire. And if you think about bamboo, it's a segmented stem. And those segments are all closed by a membrane. So when they burn, the moisture that's in there builds up, and like popcorn, it explodes. And I've actually put river cane in a brush fire I was burning, and you jump back because it pow, and it sounds like firecrackers or gunfire. Well, number one, the smoke from the fire confused the Cherokees. They weren't sure where all the Andrew Pickens men were, but they'd also convinced them there was a whole lot more of them than they thought. So they eventually just kind of dissipated, and that really, honestly, it's easy to see how that would have been a total massacre. So that's why Andrew Pickens said, you know what, this is a pretty special place, and that's where he died, right there near that rock. Very near, actually, Tomasi Knob there, on Highway 11, is really the only indication that you would ever have that this Cherokee Path crossed through this area, right on Highway 11. I think this one talks about, in 1776, for the botany folks in here, William Bartram came up the Cherokee Path in 1776, very near this area. He turned west. If you've ever been down the Cherokee Foothill Scenic Highway heading toward Walhalla, you cross Lake Kiowee, really beautiful vistas there. That's the old Kiowee River under there. And both Andre Michaud, the French botanist who discovered Oconee bells, and William Bartram came up the Savannah River, then the Kiowee River, and then turned west. and went up into the area of Highlands and Cashers in that area after that. So there's been more than Indians and colonial governors going up and down the Cherokee Path. One of the most important locations on the Cherokee Path, certainly in northwestern South Carolina, was two things really. An ancient Cherokee village, which was considered the capital of the lower towns of the Cherokees. Like I say, the Cherokees were a huge, really a nation. That's why they called them the nation. They considered most of Virginia, about half of South Carolina, and about half of Georgia, and much of eastern Tennessee as their territory, and defended it actively. The Broad River was their dividing line between the Catawbas, who they were mortal enemies with the Catawbas, and the Creeks on the other side. Well, their principal town was Kiowee. It is now under Lake Kiowee, and hardly anybody ever gets to see this marker put up here because it's out there in the middle of the woods and there's no indication it's there. It's one of those things you'd never know it was there unless you knew it was there. But you've seen it now. When Duke Power announced back in the late 60s that they were going to build the Kiowee-Toxaway project, which includes Lake Jocassee, Lake Kiowee, and Oconee Nuclear Station, a lot of these historic resources like Kiowee Town, Indian Village, and a number of other Cherokee villages up and down the Kiowee River, and the old colonial Fort Prince George were all going to be inundated. So they gave archaeologists about a year to go in and excavate what they could. And one of the archaeologists that excavated Fort Prince George, the colonial frontier fort directly across the Kiowee River from the Indian village Kiowee, actually constructed this model out of balsa wood or whatever, and the dirt that's in the floor is soil that he took from the excavation. So it's actually soil from Fort Prince George. This is the spot on Lake Kiowee where Fort Prince George and the Kiowee Indian Village were located directly across from each other. It was a pretty typical frontier fort. That design was very common with 4 cannons, small bore cannons. One of the reasons the Cherokees desperately wanted the colonial government to build Fort Prince George because they thought it would impress their enemies, the Creeks and the Cherokees. I mean, you know, these big cannons are pretty impressive when they get fired off. So they not only sold Governor Glenn the land to build it, but they actually helped construct the fort. There's a wonderful story, and I believe it to be true, that a friend of mine who's a historian loves to tell. Attakulla, which means the English interpretation was little carpenter. We don't really know where that comes from, but that's what he was called. Attakulla was chief of the Cherokees in the lower towns at that time. He's the one who did the negotiating for the Cherokees on where to build this Fort Prince George. And so Governor Glenn comes all the way up from Charleston. They come up there on the Kiowee River, and it's a beautiful floodplain. And Attakulla says, I think you ought to build the fort right over there, right on the side of the river with all these beautiful rising knolls around here. You can grow your own corn here. There's plenty of water. And the governor says, yeah, looks good to me. Where do I sign? So they signed, so he sells him about 1,000 acres. What Attakulla didn't tell him was that once they got the fort built, his men could get up on these rising knolls. And one of the soldiers in the fort in his journal wrote that he feared for his life every morning because he said they could literally see the buckles on my shoes. So Attakulla was always thinking. A little more about here's the actual excavation, which occurred, I think, in 1971. A lot of those artifacts still exist. Jane and I have picked up from where the Cherokee Path, this took a lot of detective work, but we have found where the Cherokee Path actually left the Kiowee River, not very far downstream from what I just showed you there, Fort Prince George and Kiowee Town. But this is an area called Gap Hill and Gap Hill Landing. There's a fishing boat ramp here. That's it right there, Gap Hill Landing. That's outside the little town of 6 Mile. If you've ever been to Clemson via Highway 11, you probably went through 6 Mile on 137th. The reason 6 Mile is called 6 Mile is because there is a legend, and it is absolutely that, even though lots of folks in my area think it's true. This is real hard history. No, this is pure fiction. But there is a mythical, there's a story that Katichi, or Isaquina, she's called both names, in the 1760s during these Cherokee Wars, and there are lots of these stories of Indians and their lovers that were British soldiers and they try to save them, and that she got on her pony and rode all the way from Kiowee or Fort Prince George, because she heard that Cherokees were going to attack Fort 96 down in Greenwood County and massacre everybody in there. So she gets on her pony and rides all night long, and she counts the streams as she goes along and counts the mileage. So there's a 1 mile creek, a 6 mile, and a 12 mile, and a 18 mile, and a 23 mile, and then Fort 96 she determined was 96 miles from Fort Kiowee. Well, here's the proof that that's not true. And Mary brought it this morning. This is George Hunter's map, the first map ever drawn of the Cherokee Path from all the way on the tip end of the Charleston Peninsula to Fort Loudon, 1730, 30 years before the Cherokee Wars. And you'll notice two numerals right here, 96, 96. It was called 96 30 years before Isaquina supposedly made her ride. Nevertheless, I don't argue with local historians because everybody loves a good myth and nobody likes a despoiler of myth. But I figure I'm over here in North Carolina. Y'all don't know me. You don't know my family. You don't know how to egg my house. So I can get away with that. Just above, now this is a real discovery for Jane and I. I had read numerous references, and with all due deference to Roy Vandergrift III, Roy had published widely on the internet and otherwise that the Battle of Gap Hill took place behind Gap Hill Baptist Church, which I guess if you didn't know better would make sense. And I'll show you Gap Hill Baptist Church in a minute, but there's no gap. There's no gap anywhere near. Jane and I started at Gap Hill Baptist Church based on Roy Vandergrift III's description, and sure enough, you can see down behind the church, there's the old roadbed. It's clearly the old Cherokee Path, but we started looking around, it's dead level flat. You could build a golf course there. And so we started out from there looking for a gap. Well, the historical reference says that what it was, the Battle of Gap Hill took place when the colonial forces were coming through a prominent gap in the mountains that the hump on a Bactrian camel. And the Cherokees got up on these ridges and shot down in there and just massacred them until, the British troops recovered and finally survived. First of all, I didn't know what a Bactrian camel was, so I had to go look that up. It turns out there are two kinds of camel. There's a dromedary camel, I think, that has one hump. That's the one you see most often. Then a Bactrian camel has two humps. So now you can envision two knolls and a prominent gap in between them. Well, lo and behold, Jane and I started walking right here from Gap Hill Landing. I asked the fellow who owns the landing, I said, look, I've got this historical reference that says not long after the Cherokee Path left the Kiowee River, it went through this Gap Hill. And I told him what I just told you about Roy Vandergrift III. And I said, I think that thing has to be up in here. Do you mind if I go up there? Because he'd already said he owned all that property. He said, yeah, have at it. So we walk about 300 yards up there, and lo and behold, there's the gap. There's the two Bactrian camel humps, prominent gap. They also said that when you were coming from Charleston toward Fort Loudon, when you went through the gap, you got this commanding view of the mountains. Well, if it wasn't for all that second growth stuff there, all this stuff right here, you can actually see through and you see the entire, what folks call the blue wall, the Chattooga Ridge, the wall of mountains up there, a commanding view of the mountains. Bingo, no more calls please. We have found Gap Hill. And you might notice that I turned around and looked. And I told Jane, I said, it's too bad that sign wasn't there in 1763. Might save some lives, you know. Well, this is Gap Hill Baptist Church, and like I say, sure enough, if you walk around down behind the parking lot between the social hall and the church, the old Cherokee Path is right down there. That's it. Right behind the church. It's the real deal. That's it. See how I'm talking about? Everywhere you go, this is about 4.5 to 5 feet higher than the other way you can know the difference between one of these old colonial roads like this and just a washed out place is they have a flat bottom. Obviously ditches have a, you know, narrow pointed bottom from erosion. But even though it's 300 years old, it still has a flat bottom. This is the town of 6 Mile. The Cherokee Path literally ran where this asphalt road is, because another thing that we have found, and we figured this out pretty quickly, all across the state, whenever they had gone to the trouble to get up on a ridge, they stayed on that ridge as long as they could. In the vicinity of Columbia, sometimes for 20 or 30 miles, big, huge sand ridges down. That's the Sand Hills region of the state. 6 Mile is actually on the apex of a ridge that runs about 2.5 miles. Then it drops down and crosses the 12 Mile River right above where this dam is. This is a dam for a little small community's waterworks there. And that's pretty well documented crossing there, even though it's under the water behind this dam. I'm 100% confident that's where it crossed 12 Mile. That's the slide that's out of place. That's the old stone church. Remember when I showed you Andrew Pickens' grave? I don't know how that got out of place, but that's the old stone church between Clemson and Pendleton. Well, all of a sudden, it's back in there again. This is pretty interesting. This is an old stone church, 50 feet away from Andrew Pickens, and it's an Indian grave. And all it says is Ostanopa. I know you can't read that because of the angle of the camera, but it just says the Indian's name, Ostanopa. I don't know what the story is, but you know there's got to be a story there. There's old Indian fighter Andrew Pickens buried 50 feet away in Ostanopa. I don't know whether they were big buddies or lifelong enemies, but I guarantee you there's a story there. Okay, next stop. Let me tell you what I do at this point. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I think it helps to tell this story. No, maybe not. Okay. Not much is known. Yeah. Not much is known about where something called DeWitt's Corner was. DeWitt's Corner was a trading post in the 1760s on the Cherokee Path, and it is somehow associated with due west. And here's the connection. I don't know that anybody else has ever figured this out except Dr. Lowry Ware, who I'll show you a photograph in a minute that we eventually met. He is a retired history professor from Erskine College in Due West, and he's written the definitive history of Due West. And all these old maps will show DeWitt's or Dewey's or Due's Corner, which is the forerunner of Due West, and they spell it about 6 different ways. The fellow's name was William Dews, D-E-W-E-S. This entire area of where Anderson County, Greenwood County, and Abbeville County all come together was for a long period of time settled by French Huguenots, some of whom spoke English and some didn't. And those who did speak English spoke with a French inflection. This had been their lifelong language, and even though they maybe had learned English after they arrived in Charleston, they still spoke with a French inflection. They looked at the man's name, D-E-W-E-S, Dews, as Douay, and they wrote it as D-U-E-T-T. You see that on a lot of the old maps, Duet's Corner, and DeWitt's Corner, D-E-W-I-T-T-S, and Douay eventually became Due West. There are all sorts of There are all sorts of folks who have speculated about due west is actually 30 miles due west. No, it's not 30 miles due west of anything. It's from Due's Corner. I finally met Dr. Lowry Ware. This is it. This is where Due's Corner, Mr. Due's, Captain Due's trading post was. This is where Due West started, at Due's Corner. We met Lowry Ware. What I was trying to find, I'm going to do this other section, then we'll come back to the story, because this is the creek just down behind that Anderson County sign. That's the creek where the trading post was located, right there where the Cherokee Path and now the modern paved road crosses that little creek. It was called Corner Creek, and the Indians called it Yellow Water Creek, because every time a group of men on horses or wagons would go through the creek, it would stir up the yellow clay, and the creek would be yellow for 3 or 4 days. So the Cherokees called it Yellow Creek or Yellow Water, and the Europeans all called it Corner Creek. Very near there is Cokesbury College. It's now defunct. It was a prominent academy back in the very early 1800s. Had a whole campus and a village called Cambridge, grew up around it. As a matter of fact, maybe 3 months after we photographed this, went back by there, and the Cokesbury College itself was for sale. Right by that building, if you think about the slide you just saw, 50, 75 yards to the right, that's the Cherokee Path right there. Thanks to Roy Vandergrift III, and he's right on this one. If you've ever been to Park Seed Company, you know, they have that annual flower display. That's Park Seed Company. And I went in because Roy Vandergrift had said that the Cherokee Path ran in the vicinity of Park Seed Company. Well, as a writer, I need to be a little more specific. If I'm going to tell the reader it's in the vicinity of the Park Seed Company, I need to know where, you know, how did it run. So we go inside, and at that time, the company was founded by George Park, I think in the 1800s, late 1800s. And his granddaughter, Karen, had inherited the company not very long ago. I had seen it in an article in the newspaper. So I go in and I asked for Karen Park to see what she knows about the Cherokee Path. And she said, they said, well, she's not here, but her husband runs a bookstore down on Main Street, and he knows all about the Cherokee Path. So we go down to Main Street, we find a fellow, nobody's in the store, and he spent an hour drawing maps and showing us. Turns out it ran right through here, right in front of the entrance and right by the demonstration gardens. And he's got it all documented, you know, from the original plats and everything. And as you pass Park Seed, maybe a quarter mile toward Greenwood, that's where it came from across the road and ran through the gardens that you just saw. Right past that is a little historical marker right on the side of the road for Tabernacle Cemetery. Obviously there's no church, but down that dirt road, not so far, maybe 300 yards, is the old Tabernacle Church, Tabernacle Methodist Church, and there was an academy there too. This is the cemetery for it, and like I say, the church is long gone, but this road runs right by the cemetery, Cherokee Path. You can see, there's Jane and I. It's not quite shoulder deep, but that's also dead level up there. It's not a ravine or a slope. So that's the real deal too, no doubt about that. You go just a little bit farther down that road that goes by Park Seed, and there's a development called Cherokee Hills, and the Cherokee Path runs through the golf course down there. So that section, some little short sections within the golf course are preserved. They've got a little sign up. Then when you get to 96, just outside of Greenwood, Fort 96, the old Revolutionary fort, it actually had been a colonial era frontier fort long before the Revolution. When you enter, the monument there actually is more to the Cherokee Path than to the Revolutionary fort, which had I'd say as important as Fort Prince George in the Cherokee Wars. If you've never been to Fort 96, it's a national monument now, run by the National Park Service, I think. Really, really nice. Nice asphalt paved walkways with interpretive information all along. This is the Star Fort right here, or at least where it was. It's kind of funny. You get past the Star Fort, and they got directions on the Cherokee Path. You can either turn here, go to Cherokee, or turn left and go to Charleston. This is the Cherokee Path. They've got a sign. There's your pal walking down the Cherokee Path. Apparently headed to Charleston, because I got my day pack on. And now in this place, obviously that's not a good slide, but in this place, the roadbed is at least shoulder deep there. There it is. Yeah, clearly that's the real deal. Now, I've already told you the story of yellow water. You know how the Cherokees called it yellow water. Now, here's the thing that threw us off originally when we were out there searching for where the Cherokee Path was in relation to due west. That sign is at the entrance to Erskine College. So it would lead you to believe that the Cherokee Path kind of went in, you know, the entrance to Erskine. No. It didn't even go through modern day due west. It was about 6 miles to the east of due west. Here's what happened. We went by Cherokee Trail Elementary School right outside of due west, between due west and Donalds, a little crossroads town of Donalds. And Jane, being a kindergarten teacher at that time, I said, it was summer, but I said, she can get us in. Real teacher and everything. So I said, let's go down there. Somebody, teachers are always working during the summer, and somebody will know why this school is called Cherokee Trail. So we go down there. I said, that girl right there, she's a teacher. And we're trying to find the Cherokee Trail, South Carolina Wildlife Magazine. And by the way, years ago, when Governor David Beasley was governor, the Wildlife Magazine, or the Department of Natural Resources, had a shirt, a regular staff DNR, really nice green shirt with it said staff South Carolina Wildlife Magazine on there, and they were going to give it to him for having signed some bill they wanted signed or something. Well, it didn't fit him, so he gave it back. He said, make me another one. So the editor of the magazine says, Dennis, you want this? And I said, yes, I do. So I'm a freelance writer. I've been writing for them for a long time, but I don't work for them. So now when I go around to the state researching articles, when I go into a library or the Historical Society, I walk up to the desk and I say, I'm Dennis Chastain with South Carolina Wildlife Magazine. Anything you want, whatever, how can I help you? People will mortgage their houses to get their picture and their name in South Carolina Wildlife Magazine. So I have on my shirt. Anytime we're out exploring or doing things like that, I wear that shirt. So I go into the principal's office like this, because we'd gone into the lunchroom and there were some folks in there eating their lunch, and told them what we wanted, and they all pointed down the hall and said, y'all need to go talk to the principal. So we go down to the principal's office, and I said, this is my wife, kindergarten teacher, and I work for Wildlife Magazine. And we're trying to find the old Cherokee Path. What I really want to know is, why is this school called the Cherokee Trail Elementary? He said, because in his office, his desk is by the window, he said, because it was right over there. He said, actually, it ran right down through this. Remember I talked about being on the high ridges, all that? This ridge goes right by the school. He said it was right over there. He said, but you need to go talk to Dr. Lowry Ware, who is, and I just told you, retired history professor. He knows everything about the Cherokee Path and the history of Erskine. So there we go. Next thing I know, we go, and he's retired and has been for a number of years, and they have a retirement there on campus. And we track him down, and we go, and he ain't there. I mean, you figure, you know, retired people, you can pin them down and you can usually find. No, he's off somewhere at Callahan's orchard picking peaches for everybody. So we have to make an appointment to come back at a later date. We did finally meet up with him, and Lord, the man is a walking encyclopedia of information about Cherokee Path and the history of due west and all that. That was a great experience, and really, I don't know how we would have ever solved that mystery of the relationship between the modern day due west and the real DeWitt's Corner trading post if it wasn't for that encounter with Dr. Lowry Ware. If you go a little ways down the road from Cherokee Trail Elementary in the opposite direction toward the little community of Donalds, you see this Boonesboro Township historical marker that indicates the Cherokee Path crossed the township boundary 1 mile south of here. On a later trip, we were in the Edgefield Library, And right out there among the newspapers and the magazines and the current periodicals, they had a little rack of old maps. Some of them quite old. I couldn't believe they were out there. One of them was a plat of the entire Boonesboro Township from the 1760s, and it showed the Cherokee Path going right through the middle of it. So that was a real find. Just, I'd say 150 yards beyond that historical marker, Donald's is not a very big, it's a crossroads town and not a lot of buildings there, but one of the buildings has this wonderful mural, I suppose, of Cherokees, and apparently somebody's aware of their Cherokee heritage, and in fact the Cherokee Path came through there. When you get to Saluda, South Carolina, which is where Roy Vandergrift III is from, the bank has this wonderful mural here. That is Governor James Glenn and Attakulla. I've already met both those fellows. And this is to commemorate the very first treaty ever signed between the Cherokees and the colonial government there, not in modern day Saluda, but at a place called, the historians call Saluda Old Town. It was actually a Native American village, not Cherokee. It was Saluda Indians who are thought to have come from New York and settled down here temporarily. Smallpox all but wiped them out, and it's thought that the residual population merged with the Catawba, so it's kind of disappeared. But it was the scene of the first treaty ever signed between the South Carolina colonial and the Cherokees. Roy Vandergrift, like I say, he spent a lot of time on this, and I don't in any way want to diminish or demean what he has done. He's a very competent historian. It's just that sometimes he falls for myths and things like that. Roy has found quite a number of artifacts. He and his friend found this mile marker on the Cherokee Path in Saluda County. It's in the museum there. When you approach Lexington, South Carolina, which is the next thing on the old Cherokee Path between Saluda, Lexington is northwest of Columbia. Everything has grown together in Columbia now to the point where you have to really know where the dividing lines are. It's all Columbia. But there is a discrete town called Lexington, and the Cherokee Path went right through Lexington, and when you come up behind the Super Walmart, there's a road called Old Cherokee Trail. And I have verified through probably the most prominent historian, certainly the oldest historian, 93, in Lexington, that road is in fact the route of the Old Cherokee Trail. Right there by the Super Walmart on the garden shed side. As you leave Lexington heading toward Columbia is a historical marker that you have to risk life and limb. We went by it 3 times before I thought it was worthwhile to try to find a place to park. It is a really busy road. It goes between Lexington and Columbia, comes out in West Columbia. And you have to find a place to park to go in there, and you have to park in a trailer park, where people live, to walk to the historical marker. You just have to pull up in somebody's yard. But anyway, what's important about this is this was the intersection of a western branch called the Occoneechee Path that went to Savannah. So it was an important trading path that intersected with the Cherokee Path, and it was called the Occoneechee Path because it was actually used and in large part constructed by a group of Indians that not very many people know about called the Occoneechees. And they lived on an island in the Dan River in Virginia and used this path to trade in Augusta, Georgia, and all the way down to Savannah. And this is where they intersected there. When you get into Columbia proper, or actually West Columbia, if you're familiar with Columbia, South Carolina at all, do you know where the Capitol is? And the Carolina Coliseum, where they play basketball, that's Assembly Street. The Carolina Coliseum is on a corner, Assembly Street that runs by the Capitol this way, and the road that crosses the Congaree River right down behind it is called Blossom. If you turn right on Blossom and cross the river, the first thing you see is a Lizard's Thicket restaurant on the left. That Lizard's Thicket restaurant is on Old State Road. And this historical marker is just behind the Lizard's Thicket there. Old State Road was built in 1820, and ran all the way from Charleston through Saluda Gap up here in northern Greenville County and all the way into the French Broad River. And Joel R. Poinsett, who introduced the poinsettia into North America, built the state road, and he used the Cherokee Path as much as he possibly could. This section of the old state road was the Cherokee Path. That's Brooklyn Casey High School right behind the sign there. Just down beyond Brooklyn Casey is Congaree Creek, was the scene or the site of Fort Congaree, which you remember I told you that Governor James Glenn was the one, the light bulb came on and got to establish this relationship and trade with the Cherokees, and the Cherokee Path was the only way to accomplish that. He improved very early in his administration, he improved the Cherokee Path from downtown Charleston to Fort Congaree right there in Casey, South Carolina by 1715. That's early. And established the first trading post with the Cherokees called Fort Congaree. And it's was located on Congaree Creek right behind the sewage treatment plant in Casey. And I know that because when Janie and I got down there, I kind of got lost. I had been told, well, it's so-and-so and you can't see it now, but it used to be over there and there. Well, I have a good friend who's an archaeologist with the South Carolina Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology, Tommy Charles. And I called Tommy and I said, Tommy, we're hoping to get lost down here, and I'm trying to find the old Fort Congaree. He said, I know right where it is. I'll be down there in 15 minutes. So Tommy came down there and showed us actually old Fort Congaree is in those pine trees right there. Right there. That's right behind that sewage treatment plant. And Tommy verified that is the old original Cherokee Path right there. I keep wanting to say Kings Highway because we have now been working for 2 years on another colonial road, the Kings Highway. If you've ever been to Myrtle Beach, you know Highway 17 is called Kings Highway. Well, this is the real thing. This is the real deal. We have now spent 2 summers researching the route of the original Kings Highway as we did on the Cherokee Path, and that article will be in the May-June issue of South Carolina Wildlife Magazine, which really will be out in about 3 weeks. So we're going down next week. We're going down next week to do a slideshow like this on the Kings Highway at Coastal Carolina Thursday night, and then in McClellanville the following Friday night, I think. So stay tuned on that. Particularly, I know several of you mentioned that you subscribe to the Wildlife Magazine. Like I say, that's coming up in just a few weeks. Well, we made it as far as Columbia, and that's pretty good. There are a lot of stories and a lot of territory between there and Charleston, but maybe we'll save that for a later date. I do want to very quickly just go right through some of the scenes because I want you to see Flat Stanley down there where the thing ended on the Charleston Peninsula. And I want to tell you one quick story. It is absolutely hilarious. We get all the way, there's Stanley at Fort Watson on Lake Marion. We get all the way down to Goose Creek, South Carolina, just outside of Charleston. And I had read, I guess I got it from Roy Vandergrift. He says the old Cherokee Path went right in front of the town hall for Goose Creek. Well, I had not been to Goose Creek since the 1960s, and it was just a little crossroads community. And I said, well, I'm sure it'll be easy to find. How big can the town hall be in Goose Creek? Well, you can't hardly tell Goose Creek and North Charleston from Charleston now. It's all, we rode up and down that road, and I'm looking for some old 1950s vintage town hall. Finally pulled in a filling station, and I said, I give up. Where is the Goose Creek Town Hall? He said, it's right over. I said, you mean that modern brick building? He said, yeah, they just built it 2 or 3 years ago. So we go over there. This is the gospel truth. We get out of the car, we walk in, we turn left and go in this office right here. And there's 4 or 5 ladies sitting in there, and 2 of them are behind the desk. And I walk up to the lady and I said, I'm from South Carolina Wildlife Magazine. I'm doing an article on Cherokee Path. And I said, I've got numerous old references that say that the Cherokee Path ran in front of the town hall at Goose Creek. But this is a new building, and I don't know whether it's an old one or what. And she said, well, I don't know either. She said, but I've got one of those guides that they publish to all the historical markers in South Carolina. So she turns around, goes in the file cabinet, digs the thing out. And she's sitting there at her desk, and she flips through there and she finds Goose Creek. And she looks up, she says, come with me. And so we walk outside, come out here, and there's a historical marker right there. And it says Cherokee Path, once flat right there. Yes. She was embarrassed. She had worked there 8 years and did. Now, in her defense, there's some crepe myrtles. There are some crepe myrtles that kind of obscure it, but there it is. There's the deal. And then King Street in Charleston, which is one of only 2 streets that runs the entire, this is the one with Saks Fifth Avenue and all the big high-end stores and stuff. King Street was the King's Highway. It was originally called the Broad Path, and it takes you right down to the Battery, and there's Flat Stanley. Okay, well, I've enjoyed it, and I hope you have too.